Good evening. It's episode 232 of Rail Natter. We are welcome. It's one of those episodes where we ostensibly talk about something that has nothing to do with railways. In this case, a plane crash. And in doing so, we by the end of it reach the end and realise that actually we've learned a lot about railways, and that's certainly the intention of tonight's episode, because we're talking about the crash of Independent Air Flight 1851. Which happened on my birthday in 1988, so some years before my birthday, but on the day of my birthday. And there is much we can learn from this episode, and much that I want us to go through. The first thing I need to do is ensure that my cursor is being captured. That will come in useful, and also make sure that we've got the Wacom out. We were going to need the Wacom tonight. Good grief! So. Oh, there's much we're going to cover. It should be a fairly snappy episode, but an interesting one, I think, and I'm kind of looking forward. This is an air crash that's always captivated. No, troubled me with just the extent to which so many little things that should never have individually become a problem pile up and up and up. And there's a lot, and not just little things, and not just on the day things, but big systemic things that I think are pertinent to, let's say, some of the discussions happening right now among seasoned railway people, or at least railway commentators, showing that there is a serious lack of comprehension of risk management within some of these commentators. I'm not going to name names, but just a real lack of understanding of the complex interactions of behaviors, of decisions, of systems that result in risk being unmitigated, and consequently result in harm. And we're going to talk about this. It's not a Carmen reference, although it is a reference to someone who keeps going on about Carmen. It is perhaps a reference to something that's more in the news right now. Houston. Among many other things. It's just pertinent to the whole industry, to be honest. So, I always appear mid-sentence in the stream because that's kind of how it pops up, but then it starts in the right place when the stream records. Gareth, by the way, that's why. Other Gareth watching. Hello, Gareth. Hello, Currency Gareth. Anyway, right. Of course, it goes without saying that I'm going to just content warning this off the bat, in that there are going to be descriptions and images from, not from rail crashes, of course, no, from air crash is crash brackets is no just one. Let's say an air crash. There we go. I'm editing on the fly. From an air crash. There we go. So that's something that everyone, obviously, if you don't feel like you're comfortable for that, then now's the time to dip out. I suspect that there's nothing really grim, but these things can be triggering for some people. So I just wanted to let you all know. As ever, it's time to kick off. Everyone, welcome to tonight's Rail Natter. And as the Intercity 225 fades away, we have to talk about cheese. And I do want to do a bit of cheese talk because... why do I want to do a bit of cheese talk? Well, because we have to talk about the Swiss cheese. In fact, let's get my miniaturized face up. Hello, it's little face. I'm up here. I'll go big face for a second. Hello, everyone. Look, it's me. I'm big face, and I'm in front of you. Good. Hello. Now I'm going to go small face again. Swiss cheese model. So people often talk about the Swiss cheese model, and I don't know if I've ever seen it explained hugely well. WTYP have probably done an excellent job. I can't remember. In fact, they've definitely talked about the Swiss cheese model. But the Swiss cheese model, I'm going to explain it thus. So here's the Swiss cheese model. Right. So the logic of the Swiss cheese model is that at one end here you have a bunch of threats, you have problems, hazards, perhaps you might call them. I'm not going to call them risks, because risks are unmanaged threats. So often this bit gets labelled as risks, but No, I don't disagree with that. So threats, we're going to call them threats here. And let's have them as little things flying along, these little threats, these little nasty threats, as nasty as they are, whizzing from left to right here on our screen. Now, at the other end here, we have the bad times. And the bad times are what happens if any of those threats kind of reach the left-hand side of our screen. And in the way of the bad times, we are going to place some mitigations. Those mitigations are our slices of Swiss cheese. Now, a single mitigation, you might say, and you have of our Swiss cheese, because no mitigation can be perfect. So that's why this model is sensible. You have a single, if we go for a single Swiss cheese here, single slice of Swiss cheese, then threats will get through. And there are multiple ways for those threats to get through. If you add another mitigation of some kind, whatever it happens to be, then the likelihood of those holes meeting each other, it's funny because the graphic they've used here, but the holes are kind of at different places. The point is that you go for another mitigation, the holes are in different places, so the likelihood of something getting through one and hitting and managing to get through the next is diminished. You're diminishing the likelihood that a threat gets through to create the bad times. So as you add more and more mitigations, then then the likelihood of bad times reduces further. Or you have a more you have a more perfect mitigation that has fewer holes in it. That's certainly one option. You can have a lot of mitigations, all of them quite crap full of holes. But if you have loads and loads of mitigations, actually, eventually you'll reduce the likelihood of threats reaching taking us to the bad times. So, people are saying hazard and risk. No. I'm avoiding the use of the words hazard and risk because they have a lot of loaded perceptions. So I'm not calling these, I'm going to call them threats. So some issue, some problem, some threat that will take us to the bad times. And you have a bunch of mitigations in the way. What I would... So keep this, sorry, I digress. Keep this in mind. This is the Swiss cheese model. This is important to us all. We want to ensure that we... keep this in mind. We want to think about this model as we go forward. And I was originally going to have a slices counter in the bottom corner, but it ended up being too time-consuming and very silly, so I'm not going to do that. But what I want everyone to do is keep a bit of a mental count of how many slices we're adding in. Oscar Philip Harrison, hey, tuning in for the first time live from an LNER service from London to Edinburgh. Hello, that sounds like fun. Where does substitution and elimination fit in this model? It probably can, Gareth. So... cheese. If you have lots of slices, if you have lots of mitigations that are very similar, then the holes might well line up, and you could have lots of mitigations, and you can take the analogy to the nth degree, but it's best not to be honest, because analogies are not usually great. Actually, the better thing to do is give a precise example, and you know what? That's exactly what we're doing tonight. So, we must talk about the Atlantic. And no, I don't mean the publication. I do, of course, mean the big old bit of water that goes from here all the way down to here. It's a big old hourglass-shaped lump of water that separates and gets bigger by this. If you want to know how much bigger the Atlantic Ocean is getting every second, well, the Atlantic Ocean grows as in the distance between me and Roz and Liam extends by, and all of those of you in the US and North America, hello to all of you. The distance between me and you is increasing by the rate at which my thumbnail grows. That's how much the Atlantic Ocean is growing, because there is a big old mid-Atlantic ridge, and a bunch of mucky rocky stuff is pumping out in the middle of it and extending that, pushing those two tectonic plates apart. Anyway, that big old hole has a little water in it, and we call that the Atlantic Ocean for #reasons. But that's what that is. That's the Atlantic Ocean. And this will become pertinent because one of the things of the Atlantic Ocean is that we like to get across it. And yes, we often use boats, and I'm a huge I have fixation and fascination with the boats that we used to take across the Atlantic. But one of the things that's particularly pertinent to our story is something that started happening, or that rather first happened, on the 15th of June, 1919. What happened on the 15th of June, 1919? Well, we had the first ever transatlantic flight. Two British aviators called Alcock and Brown made their first non-stop transatlantic flight. They'd been planning this for a long time. They took off in Newfoundland, landed in Ireland, and did a reasonably good job. It took them a fair old time. Good grief. I mean, can you imagine, like, sitting in a thing made of string and canvas and bouncing your way across from like across the Atlantic with like extreme weather that they encountered that apparently nearly made them ditch a couple of times, including like snow and, oh my goodness, like just chaos. But they managed it. They got a prize from the Daily Mail, and they managed it in less than 72 hours. I think that was in like 2 days, I think. It's quite impressive. And then, so like rigid airships started doing it, and that all started kicking off great. But, by the way, when they landed, they did indeed crash. Not dramatically when they landed, as in their actual landing itself was nice. They touched down nicely, but they ended up in a peat bog, and the wheels dug in, and so their aircraft did indeed get flumped. But the thing is, this thing was probably flying at about 75 knots anyway, so they probably, it's the sort of thing where you can just jump out of the aircraft and you'd be right. So there we go. That's all good fun. Nobody died probably. So let's jump forwards to the first scheduled transatlantic flights. This is pertinent. 9th of July 1939. So like 20 years later, and we have the look at this thing. Look at this. We have the Yankee Clipper here, looking, I have to say, very fat. So this is the way this is how lots of people thought aviation was gonna be for quite a long time, until we then realised it wasn't. Which was this is a Boeing 314 Clipper. It's a before the times of long runways, actually it was easy to just make your aircraft a boat also, and then land it in water, which admittedly limited the sorts of places where you could turn up, like not in the middle of land. But that was the largest kind of long distance aviation routes were served by flying boats, like the Boeing 314 here, the Boeing 314. And very fetching it is too. Is Pan Am, by the way, PAA as they were calling themselves then, Pan American. And yeah, so that was the first trip across the Atlantic on the 24th of June 1939. It went from Southampton to New York. Yes, that's right. Places with water. I don't know, Port Washington, New York, apparently. So that's all good. And then other things happened. Shenanigans happened. And let's just put the shenanigans to one side, and just understand that on the back of the or some years after the Second World War, we had some new technologies. One of these new technologies being the jet engine, and said jet engines attached to, or the originators of the jet engine, i.e. The British, we attached it to a rather beautiful aircraft, and then proceeded to blow several of them up in flight, and that led us to have to develop said aircraft into what became the Comet 4, and it was a Comet 4 that started the first scheduled jet crossings of the Atlantic on the 4th of October 1958. Here is a Comet 4. Looking very fetching. Here it is in BOAC livery on its way up, and with its lovely inline engines, and just looking fab. Very nice. Yeah, it's a shame that we used a JCB to smash up a load of these airframes quite recently. Alas, such is life. Very fetching, very nice. So there's that. But we pipped the Americans to the post ish. So 4th of October, the Comet pipped them to the post just. But obviously the Comet story is its own thing, and we'll come back to that at some point in the future, I'm sure. Actually, did we do Comet disasters? A whole episode on them? I can't remember. Did we, or did I just do a diversion on them? Anyway, I can't remember. Anyway, a little bit later, so that was the 4th of October. Like 20 days later, on the 26th of October 1958. Pan Am started its regular flights across the Atlantic, and who was operating those? Those were being operated by, or rather, what was being used to operate those? Well, these whippersnappers here, these Boeing 707s. We'll talk a little bit more about them in a minute, but the Pan Am were operating Boeing 707s. These quad-engined but externally mounted engine sort of jet airliners here, and the 707 did very much succeeded where the Comet did not, for a variety of reasons. Most of them that Boeing admit, not most of them actually, a good chunk of them Boeing admit are because of what Britain went through with the Comet, but that's another story. So transatlantic flights, a thing. You know what? Let's talk about the 707. Actually, let's just talk a bit about the 707 because this is the first jet airliner that Boeing came out with. it kind of like its development started in the kind of the early 50s, well, probably late 40s, but certainly like early 50s that they started flying prototypes, mid 50s rather, and they kept producing versions of this until nearly the 1980s. So it's an impressively longevitous aircraft, this thing. I suppose it's like the first one you do, and you kind of just keep it going as long as you can, because you're invested in it. But as is a bit of a theme with Boeing, this thing ran both Pratt & Whitney's and Rolls-Royce engines by later versions. But here it is. Pan Am being a major operator of these pretty early on, among others. It ended up in lots of military use later on as well. And also the transatlantic route was the first. There's the introduction of it. The first introduction of it was on that transatlantic flight on the 26th of October. So there's our 707 history. But this is an old aircraft, or will be by the time of our event. So keep that, put that down in your copybooks. It's a very chunky wing. Yes, that's a very chunky, hell of a chunky wing. They're wanting to maximize that's a lot of drag. We've thinned our wings out as we've optimized aerodynamics and therefore dragged efficiency out of the. We've made our engines bigger and our wings smaller to maximize fuel efficiency. More on that in a moment. Actually, it's pertinent. Thank you, Long Branch Mike, for highlighting that. Yeah, more on this later. Because we first of all have to talk about ETOPS. Yes, that's right. We have to talk about ETOPS. Now, what is ETOPS? Well, let's say we have a situation where we have an airport that we're going to start at and an airport that we're going to end at, an origin and a destination. And basically all of the various but led by the Federal Aviation Administration, and then kind of the various sort of capitalist monopolistic cabals that ran aviation until the present day and continue to. Oh wait, is this an ETOPS fable? Asks Jamie B. Well, quite. So the ICAO, for example, and others basically put limits on, and you'll understand why in a minute. They put limits on how aircraft could operate and the way in which they could operate. And so pretty early on, indeed, the early 50s, basically the US, what became the FAA. What was it like? Probably one of the commercial, the Bureau of Air Commerce, maybe? I made that up. It could have been just like the Bureau of, it wasn't the ICC. It wasn't the ICC. I think it was it was an actual air thing that existed from like the late 30s or something. Anyway, they became the FAA, and the FAA is pertinent to international air travel because lots of air travel was happening in the US because it's a capitalist hellscape. Good grief. I love watching air crash investigations, one of my favorite TV shows because I'm a maniac. And the thing that I constantly find myself wondering is, why is this a flight? That's like every second or third episode, I find myself asking, why is this a flight? Now, I don't find myself asking that in when it's a Southeast Asia episode, often Taiwan or Indonesia, where unfortunately there are a high concentration of incidents. No, it's the US commuter flights where it's like this 45-minute flight. It's like why is that not a train? Why is that a flight? You should have not made that happen, US. I can understand, like, seaboard to seaboard, but all the little stupid commuter flights that you do, when 1 in 8 of them end up, like, upside down because someone forgot to put the flaps up or they tried to do a slam dunk or some nonsense. Anyway, so we're coming back to ETOPS, but where are my E-bottoms? Thank you, Zivos, yeah. Engines turn or passengers swim, Alex Evans says. Yes, quite. Right, so all good fun. Right, so let's explain ETOPS. So, oh, no, I was doing the history, wasn't I? So let me try and remember the history. So the FAA basically said that aircraft could not operate beyond an hour from, kind of like as aircraft performance improved, they were like, right, you should always be able to come and land at an airport. You should always have the engine performance to land at, you should never get, beyond the aircraft's range, a certain range from an airport. But as engines became more, particularly as jet engines arrived, the improved reliability of jet engines meant that these regulations started getting relaxed, and Well, I'll explain with a diagram. So, right, here is, let's say you've got a big transatlantic journey, right? Big transatlantic journey, origin to destination. And so you've got perhaps some alternate airports. And this might well be across large uninhabited areas like deserts as well. But let's say it's over sea. So you've got an origin and destination. You've got your alternate airports, say, just arbitrarily located. And from each airport, you have a distance, a distance that can set by the regulator. Here we're calling it a radius with capital R. So call it a radius, but it's the distance measured in time or whatever that the aircraft can get by regulation from a given airport. And so this will become pertinent momentarily. So and likewise at the destination. And then you have alternates, particularly for transatlantic flights in the early days of flight. You needed to go up over land as much as possible because doing so meant that you, for example, would refuel, because people needed to do that in places like Greenland and the Azores, foreshadowing. And so each of your alternate airports as well, like alternates as to whether you are or are not going to land in them, even if you do have enough fuel for the flight, you need to be within range of the alternate should you have an engine failure. That's kind of the logic of it. And so you end up with these radii as well. So you end up with these circles. Now, so that you end up with this sort of space within which, and let's merge these, and then you end up with airspace you're allowed to be flying in. So if you have, so say a non-ETOPS, so ETOPS, by the way, specifically stands for Extended Range Twin Engine Operations Performance Standards. So basically it's saying if you've only got two engines and you lose one engine, you have to be able to get back to an airport, and therefore you are limited. But the ETOPS regulation said, but we'll let, if you can prove that your engines have good enough performance, we'll let you get a bit further away. So originally you'd have to fly like this to get from your origin to your destination. You have to kind of stay within the bubbles. ETOPS allowed you to basically fly direct because in most cases you have a nice, modern-ish for the time, high-performance aircraft that allows you to go straight from origin to destination. And this is kind of starts kicking off, like ETOPS starts kicking off really in the kind of the earliest ETOPS starts kind of kicking off in the late 70s, in fact. And this bit, sorry, the bit between once you escape the bubbles, I know I said escape. When you escape the bubbles, this is the ETOPS bit here. So this bit here is the ETOPS bit. Very nice. Lovely. So 1976, let's take this lovely picture of an Airbus A300. Here it is, Airbus with its fun original Airbus logo, which is actually quite nice. I quite like the original Airbus logo. I mean, it does say an S rather than an A, but that's fine. Airbus Industry. Here's Airbus A300. Anyway, these were the first wide-body twin-engine aircraft. They didn't have four engines. They only had two engines. This is good because engines are expensive and complicated and heavy, and so the fewer of them you have, even if the engines are bigger, the fewer of them, the lighter your aircraft, and the reduction in fuel required per seat and therefore cost per seat because of the less maintenance as well. So twin engine is good. And tri-jets have been going around to kind of get around the inability to do traveling. So like late 1960s, like the tri-jets were the way to get around these issues. But because only the twin jets were restricted by the 60-minute rule. So at this point, the A300, when it was introduced, the ICAO were like, you know what, you can go 90 minutes. And that allowed them to extend their range and some of the journeys they could do. Because there were more direct journeys that were therefore, yet they could fly shorter distances and so on and so on. And by the time so here's the A300. So this early ETOPS, if you like, started to get exemptions and pushing and what we call ETOPS. 1985, this is where we started seeing, we saw the ETOPS distance getting extended to 120 minutes. The first aircraft to start operating under this sort of new regime was 1st February 1985. It was a Boeing 767, this thing here. Wide-body, twin-engine competitor to the A300, and it just consumed like a dump ton less fuel, so it's much more fuel efficient, which means that it has extended range as well. Same fuel you're carrying, you get a lot further. And then this was fairly quickly followed by an Airbus A310, which I've gone and hidden, but that doesn't matter. So there's also an Airbus A310 that they started doing this. So Airbus came along and did it as well, but the 767s kind of got there first. And this means a lot less fuel is getting consumed. And for all sorts of reasons that aren't just ETOPS, the efficiency of these newer engines as well, and improved aerodynamic design. Well, this meant less fuel, and it also meant that aircraft stopped having to do mid-Atlantic refueling, which had been pretty common even for what we might perceive as some of the modern jets in the 60s and 70s. And it also kind of rendered, ETOPS, the prevalence of ETOPS kind of rendered, it's not called ETOPS anymore, by the way, it's called something else, because they basically started doing the same thing for other aircraft and classifying other aircraft with four engines too. So it's not ETOPS anymore, it's something else with a D in it. But these two, so the 707 and even the 747 kind of got rendered largely obsolete by ETOPS. So these big four-engine aircraft, the redundancy you got with four engines, they kind of stopped. They fell out of favor. Actually, it's far better to have like a 777 or a 310 or the other derivatives. The big ones, the big wide-body but twin-engine derivative aircraft are now the go-to when it comes to moving large numbers of people about. This, however, had a secondary effect, which we'll talk about momentarily. Oh, the other thing I was going to do is say, yes, redundant, makes no sense. These are now retired. Why would we ever develop another one of these? Yes, alas, the A380. Another time, perhaps. Anyway, forget my own gags there. Anyway, right, so... Standards and recommended practices. SARPs replaced ETOPS in 2017. No, was it SARPs or was it something else? I think it had another. EDTO. I think extended diversion time operations. I think is what it's now called. Anyway, right? Yeah, sad tuba sound. So 1966. Why are we going to 1966? Well, we're going to 1966 because we have to talk about. Skylarks Enterprises Incorporated. Here they are. Atlanta Skylarks Georgia Flying Country Club. Just a bunch of hicks, a bunch of folks. Actually, I don't know. But anyway, basically, they are. It was a travel club based in Atlanta, and they're this managing company that founded in '66. Operated all their flights for the travel club with this knackered-looking DC-7. And a new company was formed in 1970 called Independent Air Incorporated, which purchased all of the outstanding stock of Skylarks Enterprise Incorporated and the DC-7. Continued kind of running with continued the relationship with the club, and dry lease its aircraft to on an exclusive basis, but sort of started doing charter stuff. Roll forwards to 1983, Independent Air is still operating, and they purchased two Boeing 707s, because the side effect of the 707s, 747s becoming obsolete is that lots more of them, particularly the older 707s, is that loads of them became available for secondary operators, of which Independent Air was absolutely a secondary operator. Good grief. So there's all sorts of shenanigans, takeovers in the mid-80s, and holding companies, and challenges with funding because they were trying to meet federal engine noise regulations and trying to buy another aircraft, and good grief, all sorts of fun. Also funding their snazzy new office in Smyrna. I was going to say that in Serbian voice. No, in Smyrna in Tennessee. Catch me if I'm pronouncing that wrong. I don't know. But anyway, they moved their offices from Georgia to Tennessee in the mid-80s. In 86, in fact, 2 years before our event. So, that's where we're at this point. So, Detour says, fun fact, I've camped on the runway of one of the original airfields in the Azores on San Miguel, the biggest island. There we go. Thanks, Deirdre. Very, very interesting to know. Talking of the Azores, we have to talk about the Azores, which were and remain part of Portugal, although running with increasing autonomy. This is why I've got the cursor switched on, because we're in Google Earth. Now, we were talking about the Atlantic Ocean. Here it is. We were talking about the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. Here it is. You can see where all the fun stuff is happening. You can actually see this big old volcanic lumpy thing here, which we'll come to in a second. Just want to point out, like, if you're flying across the Atlantic, you can see the Earth is nominally a sphere, although it isn't. It's more like a Satsuma shape in exaggeration. But you can see that the way you fly to North America early doors is via Greenland to refuel, or Newfoundland, and then across. But if you're coming across from the eastern seaboard, you're going to come up. This is why you go via Newfoundland and then across, and you can see why you hit Ireland, because Ireland's the first thing you hit. That's if you're going on the northern routes into Europe. But if you want to go to Italy, for example, then actually, or up to France from, say, South America. But certainly, if you're coming from North America across and you go to Italy, then actually it's not very useful to be up in Iceland and Greenland and then down, or even just you're doing your refueling in Newfoundland and across. It kind of takes you to the wrong side. So the Azores found themselves, which are, by the way, are down here. You can see there's Portugal. Hello, Portugal over here. Hi, lovely Portugal. The Azores are this collection of islands down here. There they are. See them sitting on these funny large lumps, these funny large basaltic volcanic lumps, a big old plateau, and these funny little artifacts from the way that the seafloor has been modelled. Anyway, we go down to Santa Maria here, this island. This is our island here, and you can see that this island, airports are a blight because an enormous amount of its good land is taken up with this nonsense down here, which is a massive international airport. Why? Well, for a variety of things. But they also grow tea in these Azores. Thank you, Deirdre. Also very interesting. I've had a few people commenting on the YouTube. Shout out to everyone commenting on the YouTube about being upset that I get distracted. I've done 233 episodes of Rail Natter, and at this point, I'm led to believe the distractions are part of the fun. If the format doesn't work for you, then you could probably skip the little digressions, or the series might not be for you. Anyway, I digress. The reason I digress is because it's live, and you can come and shout at me in person, as nobody ever does. No one angry ever turns up in the chat. It's such a shame. Actually, it's not a shame. It's nice. So here's a runway, because the Azores were a very useful dropping off point. Well, firstly, they were a very useful alternative to allow people to have a big bubble that was close, and it was made great use of in a Canadian airliner near disaster in the kind of the early 2000s. They are, if you have your 1 hour bubble, then it allows you to kind of string together. It provides you a safe connection across the Atlantic. Also provides a refueling point if you need to refuel, which for aircraft like the 707 was common. You would stop off, refuel. No one would get off. You'd just be sat in the aircraft, and then sometimes you went off and went to the terminal and got a packet of crisps, and then you come back. So here's the island of Santa Maria. A very fetching looking thing. Now we have to talk about let's just go down here. There's a lump here that we want to talk about. This thing here, this lump here, this mountain, the peak of Santa Maria is Pico Alto, and you can see over here behind. You can see where the runway is. You can also see that this mountain is in the way. It is in the way. If you're approaching an aircraft, it is in the way of the runway. That's an important thing for us to have fresh in our minds, right? So this is useful. JB is saying, I'm upset you got distracted by this comment. I have been distracted by that comment, JB. What a distraction. So let us jump to the 8th of. Actually, you know what? What's quite interesting is that. So let's talk about. The flight crew had been flying. They'd been in Jamaica, and then they went to Texas. They went to Colorado, and kind of came back to Montego Bay. They received their assignment for a flight from Milan to the Dominican Republic, with a scheduled stopover in Santa Maria in the Azores. And I'm saying that's Spanishy, but it's not Spanishy. It's very much Portuguese. So apologies for my pronunciation. Portuguese kind of sounds like Polish with a Spanish accent. No, it doesn't really. I mean, maybe a little bit. So 7th of February, after a flight of 10 hours and 40 minutes, the crew arrived in Genova. They diverted from Malpensa Airport in Milan because of poor weather, so they then arrive back in Bergamo 3 hours later. They various shenanigans actually at this point. So this is foreshadowing of issues with the training and the capability, and the Hannah Goodliff. The distractions are absolutely part of the fun. Otherwise, I'm just watching a normal presentation where I can't good-naturedly heckle at the same time as watching. You can all heckle, absolutely. I'm not going to insult the Portuguese by calling it Galician. No, one noun. I'm not going to do that. Absolutely not. Anyway, so some of the issues were basically they had some issues with flight plans. So duration of the first flight was supposed to be a kind of, it was very different to what they actually actually were supposed to be doing in that first leg of this, and not the flight that we're going to be talking about momentarily, but its preceding flight. They've had air navigation charts that were 30 years out of date, and this is foreshadowing for some of the issues we're going to be talking about momentarily. So that's the Azores. So let's jump to the 8th of February 1988, shall we? And we find ourselves in Bergamo Airport, also called Il Caramaggio International Airport, because of its proximity to the village where the painter, it's fine. You can look it up. It's yeah. So also, I think Bergamo Airport is just a Ryanair hub now. It's fine. It's near Milan. It's like Orio al Serio International Airport. It is the third busiest international airport in Italy today. But anyway, at the time, less so. Still very busy. So at 10:04, flight 1851 departed Bergamo Airport. It kicked off. And, well, so what I'm going to do is go through... I'm going to go... The way we're going to do this, I'm going to kind of surf my way through the kind of the timeline of the flight. And was this the super spreader airport back in early 2020? Oh yeah, quite possibly actually. If I want to do equal opportunities racism, say it's Galician, but for the one in Ukraine, lol. Okay, yeah, we're getting into the deep lore of European racisms now. Let us press on. So there's a few things we want to talk about, and the flight plan issue that I alluded to in the previous sort of section continues to be pertinent. So, I didn't want that to go there. Wait a minute, I'm going to do this because I want this to be in front of my face here, because I need to refer to some bits and pieces. So, yeah. So the kickoff issue is the flight plan and working out exactly how they would navigate to the airport and what beacon they would use, because there's some outdated. So right, you're counting your slices. Well, we're now taking slices away, and one of the slices we're about to take away is the antenna. Sort of the radio beacon technology was outdated at Santa Maria, and the flight plan that they'd submitted was not in compliance with the usual flight plan. I've popped up an old 1960s chart here, which, to be fair, might have been the one they were bloody using. There are a few things to note here, by the way. One of them is this, just here, minimum altitude 3,000 from 25 nautical miles out. That's pertinent to pay attention to. Just have that in your head, fresh in your mind. Very, very important number there to pay attention to. So here's our little island with its massive airport occupying one bloody whole side of it. So there's a particular approach that they should have been taking and decided, for various reasons, did not. There are lots of, say, anomalies in the information provided in relation to Santa Maria Airport. Not least, like there are kind of just conflicting information over what their kind of approach should be. So let's kind of park that for now, and so let's jump forwards to let's jump forwards to about midday, or between midday and 1 o'clock, and we've got some issues being experienced by our crew. Oh, you know what? We should tell you who the crew are, shouldn't we? We should tell you who the crew of the aircraft are. So they're operating in a 21-year-old 707, and there's a flight crew of Captain Douglas Leon Doherty, who's 41, First Officer Samuel Sammy Adcock, who's 36, and Flight Engineer Jorge Gonzalez, who was 34. And there was also obviously a crew of flight attendants as well. I think there were 4 flight attendants, and there were 137 passengers on board the aircraft. So weirdly, one of the flight attendants was engaged to marry Captain Doherty as well. So this is completely irrelevant, but perhaps pertinent information. So the flight crew are having issues kind of contacting contacting ground control, and kind of also having issues with tying into the radio beacon to actually establish their flight path. So having issues with they're having issues with their that's a very good point. Minimum altitude. So this is a very good point. The minimum altitude 2,000 is about if you're approaching from this side. But the 2,000 is also. That's also a number that's pertinent that you should pay attention to. Gareth, thank you for highlighting that. Anyway, so sorry. Oh, so wait. Yes, so they're having issues getting their fix, and they're making an approach, kind of trying to make an approach that was supposed to be VOR, but they're actually finding themselves basically they're approaching the wrong approach. They should have been approaching. Let's get Google Earth up. They should have been approaching. Kind of against lower land. They should have been kind of flying along this way, coming in, and then kind of going this way, and then flying up, and then doing a bit of a wee, and then lining up to then come in and land here on the runway. Happy days. What they were actually doing was flying in like this. In fact, more like this, to go straight over the top of Pico Alto. Were they precise? Were they aware of the risks below their tummies? There are some heights marked on the charts. So Pico Alto is shown on the chart, 1936 feet here. So whether this was similar to their chart or not, but anyway, they're a key thing. 3,000 keeps getting mentioned. If you have a missed approach, right turn, climb to 3,000 on a track of 280 degrees, so on and so on. So yeah. Lots of discussions of 3,000, very important, and discussions of what your approaches are, and blah 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 blah. Fine, okay. So they've had issues with approach. So let's park that now. The next thing we have is their first officer giving. Yeah, right. So let me skip forwards. Forgive me. I'm going to skip forwards to the. So we've got some issues with the radio, but they've now established the ground controller, the air traffic controller has now at 1344 established contact with flight 1851, and gives an instruction about the and in fact previously had given an instruction about cloud levels, which were, let's say, misinterpreted. So because you have an inexperienced controller using incorrect language, this is another problem here, another Swiss cheese issue. Tools enter flight simulator. Now I'm resisting the flight simulator in Google Earth. So we had an incorrect readout of meteorological conditions, and it was misinterpreted because they were using just slightly incorrect language and incorrect protocol. The flight crew misinterpreted the meteorological information as the floor of the cloud cover was at 2,000 feet, and so if they went below 2,000 feet, they would be below the cloud, and they would have a clear view of the terrain. That was a very important miscommunication. Now, within the next transmission being made was a transmission covering, we have to talk about QNH values, or rather the changes in relative ground pressures that allow the aircraft to work out that it's at 0 feet, i.e. where its feet, its wheels, its undercarriage are going to hit the ground. So this is a really important thing that every airport has to do, and it updates because it changes based on weather conditions. So if you have varying weather conditions, then it means that the your pressures change. So high pressure, i.e. like often clear skies and nice weather, then you have then that changes how much what altitude the aircraft might think it's at, and that can alter by quite a significant number of feet. Hundreds of feet it can alter with different referring to different hectopascals, and so it measured in hectopascals, by the way, and so in this instance the controller, for whatever reason, the trainee controller misstated the QNH. Trainee controller transmitted independent 1851, Roger, you're cleared to ... 3,000 feet on QNH 1027, and runway will be 19er. Now, in that transmission, the trainee sent an incorrect QNH. For whatever reason, was 9 hectopascals too high. For whatever reason, they'd said 1027. What they should have said is 1018. So this, why on earth the mistake was made, who knows? It's just, for whatever reason, there was a confusion. What's interesting is that this was kind of picked up and recognized as a mistake, but not, for whatever reason, the supervising air traffic controller basically kind of got distracted by a phone call and then did not then chase up and fix. Basically got distracted, did not then chase and fix. There was a chance for the crew members to pick this up as well. The crew members could have noticed that 12 minutes earlier there was a much lower pressure value, and the number that they then got was much higher. They should have noticed that this was different and challenge it. They had the opportunity to do so. However, there was a flight attendant in the cockpit at this point. Their voice was recorded in the cockpit voice recorder. So during this period, they were distracted. So there's another slice of Swiss cheese, and that they were kind of on the approach. They did not have to have sterile cockpit at this point. They weren't below 10,000 feet, but they were on the approach, and they should, for important messages, you should be making sure that basically ensuring that you deal with those messages when you are undistracted. So now that was at 13. So that they were now at 1404. Again, during this period, the co-pilot made another call. The co-pilot told the controller, "We're cleared to 2,000 feet," and but paused mid-sentence. And then, so it's really, this is the absolute clincher. So I'm going to read this as clearly as I possibly can. So, I'm just going to absolutely get this clear moment right. So, QNH error, very big problem, but the next error is an even bigger one. So, at 1356, while 1851 was descending through from 22,000 feet, Santa Maria Tower transmitted independent 1851, Roger, you're cleared to 3,000 feet on QNH 1027, and our runway will be 19er, as we've said. There's a pause. At the pause, the trainee controller then continued speaking. Expect ILS approach, runway 19er, report reaching 3,000. The transmission ended. Now, this transmission was picked up in the ground recordings, but not in the CVR, because, as is found out when the investigators later listened to the CVR, the first officer keyed his mic, as in pressed to talk, and read back, "We're re-cleared to 2,000 feet," and the first officer paused for a few seconds, then unkeyed the mic momentarily, which meant that they missed the 3,000 feet. Simultaneously, this "ah" was uttered by the first officer. A voice in the background, which was the captain, said, "Make it 3." That didn't seem to have an effect. No one really noticed that. The first officer keyed the mic and transmitted 1027. So that's confirming the QNH, the incorrect QNH. And that was the last transmission to air traffic control. There was no read back. Air traffic control should have double confirmed what the minimum descent altitude was, the minimum descent level. That figure is critical. The minimum descent altitude, as in the lowest that the aircraft can get until it has sight of the until they have visual sight of the runway. So the report said after being cleared for, sort of the key thing, so 1356, the crew had been cleared for the ILS approach instrument landing system, by the way, because there's some clouds, so they're being brought in by instruments and by radio beacon, albeit a primitive one. They failed to accomplish an approach briefing, so they did not do an approach briefing going, this is the information on the chart, this is our minimum descent altitude. If they had, they would have picked up that the minimum safe altitude, the minimum descent altitude was 3,000, not 2,000 feet. And they'd have also noticed that Pico Alto, which was clearly marked on their 1980s chart, I hope it was a 1980s chart, but even this 1960s one we were looking at a minute ago had Pico Alto there in red. There is, it's clearly visible. So not good. So we have serious issues with trainees and workload at Santa Maria Airport. We have issues with communication with the crew in the independent aircraft, so that the crew is clearly not, they're distracted. They've got staff coming in, the flight attendants coming in. They're not confirming. They're not doing a pre-brief. The company procedure, independent air procedure, required that after receiving and reading back a clearance with ATC, reading back critical, the hands-on pilot, in this case the captain, should repeat loud and clear his understanding of the clearance so that all crew will be aware of its contents, particularly the sector altitude. That didn't happen. So at 1402, the flight was 25 nautical miles from the point of from the end of its flight, shall we say, dropping through flight level 665, so 6,500 feet. Sorry, my little one is wiggling around. It's very unnerving. I've got Dina's away. Dina's birthday is around this period, and so she's off seeing some friends, and little one is wiggling around before me on the monitor, and it's more distracting than you lot even. So 1403, the first officer said, after 2,000, we'll get below those clouds. So this additional confusion of we're aiming for 2,000. So they're thinking about the 2,000. They've got 2,000 in their head by misinterpreting what their minimum descent altitude was. So this 2,000 figure is really fresh in their mind. And where the aircraft thinks 2,000 feet is not where 2,000 feet is either. So 1406, the flight was less than 8 nautical miles from its end, and beginning to level off at 2,000 feet. So it's already dropped, and there's some turbulence at this point. So at 1407, the flight was over Santa Barbara and entering clouds at about 700 feet. So it's kind of quite a lot lower at 1407. We're reaching the end of 1407. The captain said, I can't keep this son of a bitch thing straight up and down because of the turbulence. 1407.57, the first officer offers to help, but the captain says no. Now, let me just get up the exact transcript because this is pertinent. So, 1406.57, sorry. We're at level 2, yeah. We're at level 2, yeah, to the left. Starting to pass through layers here. Can't keep this son of bitch thing straight up and down. Can I help you? No. That's reaching the end of 1407. Now, let me just catch, just in case there's anything else pertinent I want to add. So the aircraft at this point is, let's bring Google Earth back up. So at this point, the aircraft is coming along. I wonder if it'll be picked up in the context. Probably not quite, but essentially it was crossing. Let me just zoom out a bit so I get the actual approach kind of right. It's coming this way. It was, it kind of came over a valley. So it came through this, so it came through this height here, and then dropped out again. You got this little valley before it really started getting close. And at this point, let's just so at this point, just around about. It's very important that I get the timing just right here. So at approximately 1408, this sound. Actually, no, at 1408, the radio altimeter begins to whine. So the radio altimeter is starting to moan that they are below so they twisted the dial to set their minimum descent altitude at 2,000, and they get an audible warning when they drop below that. So the radio altimeter starts going, you're below your minimum descent altitude, right? About this time, there's so 1408, pretty much exactly. as I've just shown you on Google Earth, there is a sudden drop from 1751, followed by a sudden climb to 1869. So basically, they go over this valley, and they start hearing this.
Pull up. Pull up. Pull up.
Gosh, fucking chilling hearing it, isn't it? Really, I don't know. It's just really very, very chilling. At this point, 7 seconds worth of that noise sounded. 7 seconds. The crew did not comment on it. They did not make any inputs, or certainly they did not make any sudden responses. They just almost no inputs at that point. At which point, the aircraft smashed into a sort of sheer rock wall near the ridge of the mountain, and everyone was killed, and it left this just wreckage, smashed wreckage of a 707 absolutely everywhere. So if we just come in here, the aircraft came in and pretty much did this. Like, that's pretty much what happened. Not good, you know. We do not like to see it, folks. It impacted. Impacted a kind of a vertical, just off the ridge, basically, to the point where there are views down. You know, you can see. In fact, you can see in some of the imagery. We'll get some of the imagery back. You can, so that this top corner here, you can see the views down to the sea and down to the coast from where they're sat. You know, it's not good. 7 seconds of that alarm going off and not doing anything about it. Now, it turns out that they had not had training, that they needed to, that as soon as they hear that the first thing you do is you throttle up, and you, the critical thing, that you throttle up and you pull out of the situation. This is absolutely critical thing to do, and they did not do that. I'm just going to quickly, actually, while I'm here, pop in a bit of graphic that I think will be helpful. Yes, marvellous. Sorry, I'm just chucking in an extra slide that I think will be useful. And another one that I think will be quite useful. Sorry. I'm going to pop these here because I think they're going to be... Yes, that's copy-paste sound effects that you can hear. Yeah, they're lovely. And I think that is all of them. Yeah, perfect. So, I want to just... So, let's just have a quick look at what was going on in those final first second in fact, it's worth saying, actually, you know what, let's just, we're going to, referring to the actual Portuguese crash report happens, kind of covers off all these things that I've gone through, all of these successive failure. I don't know if anyone was keeping count, but that's a lot of failures all stacked up, a lot of slices of Swiss cheese simply being pulled out of the equation. Let's have a look at some of these graphics from the kind of modified from the crash report. So on the left hand side here we have the final seconds, and we can see kind of what the final seconds show. And yeah, 7 seconds of whoop, whoop, pull up, which is like absolutely unambiguous. It tells you what to do. Do what it says. That's this point. So the aircraft's coming in here. It's continuing to descend. They kind of level off a bit. There's a bit of a drop and a climb again that I suspect is... I don't know whether it's turbulence or whether that was just the valley they were going over. I suspect it's kind of the valley. And they then level off again, kind of, and then do nothing when they hear it. Bearing in mind the alarm, this alarm here, going off for ages. They hear it for ages, they do nothing, and they then slam into the mountain. Now, key thing of everything here that we want to talk about is here's let's go to the right-hand side diagram, which shows a slice through Pico Alto and an aircraft hitting the top of Pico Alto. Let's work our way down in altitudes to understand what's going on here. So the top A here is the indicated altitude at 3,000 feet with the altimeter set correctly. That's A. Now, with the altimeter set as they'd had it read to them by the controller at Santa Maria, is B here. So down to 2,760 feet. So that's 240 feet drop in altitude. But if they'd taken the correct minimum descent altitude, not a problem. C here is the indicated altitude with their altimeter set at 1018, and had they stuck to their incorrectly interpreted minimum descent altitude, without the incorrect QNH, they would have gone over the top of the mountain still. Now, D here is the incorrect altitude of 2,000 feet as interpreted by the as read by the controller incorrectly and then not challenged by the flight crew, combined with the incorrectly set altimeter with the incorrect QNH value, which gives a value of 1,760 feet, which is 35 feet below the peak of Pico Alto. So that is why the aircraft crashed, essentially. This graphic pretty much lines up exactly what the issue was. Not good. Now, what happened after this? Yeah, here's the view down. You can see sort of just the remains of bits of aircraft piled up next to the road. Pretty horrific. What happened after this? It's worth saying that 7 seconds, if they'd heard that sound and then responded, they would have also cleared the top of the hill. They would have got over the top of the mountain. It's pretty grim stuff. So, yes, everyone was killed. This continues to be the deadliest aviation disaster to occur in Portugal, and the fourth deadliest involving a 707. So there was some, yeah. It's grim. So seriously, there was poor cockpit communication. They neglected aerodrome control tower procedures in not requesting their readbacks. There are like 20 things that we can list off here, like huge numbers of things that they were not conforming. Lack of appropriately authorized routes, flight plan failures, just not good. By the way, shortly after this, Independent Air collapsed inwards on themselves. Oh, aviation, yeah, 700. There are several other very nasty crashes with 707s. The other serious crashes we had were no, that's not what I want to say. The top. I'm trying to see if the four. I can't list off the worst ones, but there are lots of really, yes, even more nasty crashes. I wonder if there are any more recent ones. I suspect they're all in the 70s because that's when all the crashes happened. Yeah, there's one for you to Google. Independent Air went in the toilet because this really hit their, their flight was full of Italians. That was a lot of their market was Italians flying to into the Mid-Atlantic, the West Indies, the Jamaica and Barbados and other places, and they decided they didn't want to do that. With Independent Air. Independent Air, it also turned out people have been complaining about the condition of the aircraft as passengers, like seats being knackered and flickering lights and general concerns about the quality of the flying experience and the actual aircraft itself. So it's quite clear that the airline was skimping on maintenance, skimping on staffing, skimping on training. Not good. But what can we, as railway people, what can we learn from this? That's the key question. What can we learn from it? Do send your questions over. What we learn from this is that you can't just, yes, there are lots of miniature things, like process things that you got right, but there are bigger issues here. Like, if they weren't operating this old aircraft, they would never have had to land and take off here. They would have just gone straight over the Atlantic. So big picture, macro stuff has an influence, but also the fact that there were these cascaded aircraft is because the regulations perceived to be improving safety forced a cascade of aircraft down to the less, inherently meant that airline companies with a worse safety record were operating older aircraft in more challenging conditions. The thing about flying is that pretty much all the problems happen when you're landing or taking off. So doing that less ETOPS and refueling and such allowed just prevented, it reduced the number of accidents by merit of the fact that aircraft were not touching down and taking off so frequently. ETOPS in the allowed twin engine aircraft and therefore greater range for the fuel on board, so on. All these various things, that it's a more complicated picture, but the improving efficiency of the modern jet airliners as well, meaning that they can fly much further on two engines or even one engine on less fuel, and therefore they don't need to. They can basically fly. You can almost fly non-stop from Europe to Australia, whatever happens. You can do enormous long flights without stopping because you don't need to, because of the immense fuel carrying capacity and efficiency of modern jet engines, with negative secondary consequences. So inadvertent consequences of regulations, safety regulations meant to protect. So having good understanding of the potential ramifications, doing impact assessments of regulation changes is really important. Training is critical. Interactions of staff and different staff from different training backgrounds is critical. Operators, infrastructure, training has to be right, and the communication between those different organizations has to be right. These are all pertinent factors. Big picture impacts, little picture, human errors, ergonomics, communication, all of these things interact in such a way that, getting this wrong, getting all of these wrong, or even major parts of these things wrong, can result in calamity. But more than that, for the railways, you have to look at the big picture and the small picture to manage risk. You have to look at crashworthiness and the broader systemic challenges of climate change simultaneously. The small political decisions that led Transport Scotland to retain an old train that was not safe to operate relative to trains that they could have otherwise, and indeed are now beginning the process of procuring. Deciding to retain or install, rather than simply switching off the departure boards in their original position and placing them in the new position to improve crowd management and crowd flow, sticking a massive, bright, discombobulating advertisement board in the place of those departures boards, is not managing risk appropriately. And this... it's important that we have this broad systemic view. That's why I wanted to go through this crash, because there are just so many things, like genuinely, like just a cascade of like I think it's around 20 factors, of which pretty much if any one had been altered, including some of the big macro stuff, but certainly if any one of those had been altered, you would not have seen the incident. I think that's what's so shocking, is that any one of them had been resolved, caught. But they all interrelate as well. It's not a simple case of, well, if we'd done that, it would have fixed it. It's like, well, no, inherently, because of the lack of crew training, the poor crew resource management, the lack of briefings, that accounted for several of the failures. Now we're talking, Hannah, you're right. We're now doing the talk about trains. And so that's for me why this is a particularly interesting example of the interaction of different failure modes resulting in the death of 144 people. I would suggest, thankfully, hopefully, fairly snappy conditions. Not a slow death. Let's at least take some comfort in that. But let's face it. Also, they were on holiday, and they'd probably rather have got to their holiday destination. So that is the crash of Independent Air Flight 1851. What are your thoughts on this and other things? Human error during descent. Yeah, it's worth saying they also dropped below the minimum descent altitude, their perceived minimum descent altitude, for a bit as well. There's a cascade of all sorts of things. Can we do a led by donkeys on the advertising? Possibly, yeah. I was thinking you meant the podcast, which could be entertaining. I mean, yeah, I suppose we could hijack it, yeah. So... Tim Ballum reckons that almost 100% of all aircraft problems happen at a terrain interface. The few times that I wouldn't say that was necessarily the case for the Lockerbie air disaster, for example. Yeah. Although that wasn't an aircraft problem, you are right. Yes. Anyway, what we've learned from this is that we should build HS2, is what Unperson says. I mean, you're not wrong, actually. We have mugs that make this point very nice that I'm about to plug. The Wikipedia list of accidents and incidents involving the 707 is long. Well, you'd expect it to be, because it's a very long-lived aircraft, and the first the first of the Boeing airliners, and it was still being manufactured until nearly the 80s. So yeah, kind of understandable. Yeah, a certain Malaysian flight had a mid-air interface. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, Chakidadri. Yeah, Uberlingen. Yeah, well, quite or Zagreb. There's one that always sticks fresh in my mind. Maybe someday we'll do a Boeing episode, but I think W2OP haven't done a Boeing episode yet, have they? Or have I just? No, they have they? I've like the podcaster brick has hit me, and I'm just ceasing to retain some key information. Right, I'm going to wibble off, and wave to you all, everyone. Oh no, I'm not going to say cheerio because there's the plugs to do in there. I'm forgetting how I do my own episode. Right, get rid of my face, everyone. Thank you so much for listening to this in audio only format. I'm glad you joined me for this one. We've caught up on the uploads. I think everything's uploaded. Have we? Yeah, I think we have. Yeah, I think so. Anyway, yeah, no. Thanks for listening. Hopefully this kind of worked. There were some sound effects. There's some audio gags that I forgot that I'd entered. Standard. Patreon.com/Gareth Dennis for the usual for the support that you give. Thank you, Patreon folk. Thank you so much. Very, very kind. GarethDennis.here/merch for the merchandise, including Build HS2 Now, which everyone at the Labour Party conference I hope was wearing. I don't know anyone at the Labour Party conference. A few people maybe. There's a few others. There's other suggestions for new ones. So shout at me about the suggestions that I keep forgetting about. As I have a memory like a sieve, and also I have a pile of things I need to post to people. You'll get an extra surprise in the post with the hugely delayed prizes from the prize episode a long time ago. There's an extra bonus goodie in there now for you, so you'll be pleased to know. PayPal.me/Gareth Dennis for Loose Change and Abuse, and GarethDennis.uk/Discord for the chat to continue ad infinitum. You'll be very glad to know that you'll be very glad to know that the reshuffle of the technical channels has occurred, so that'll make things a bit easier. People are asking for when more Amphitrust is going to be happening. Yeah, well, quite. Possibly, I was going to do some tonight. We've got 15 minutes, possibly, if I could set up an episode. Maybe we do one tonight, actually. Should we do it? I haven't really prepped or anything, but maybe we just do it, and I just crack on. I need to do a thumbnail and all sorts. I just haven't thought. We may do one tonight. I haven't got it in the list of credits, but if I manage to, then maybe we will. It'll be last minute. Of course. Why is this? Why is my video? What's the nice video of the? There we go. That's better. It's because I'm using the scroll wheel, not my arrow. There's a nice freight train and me holding the book. Yes, because the book is pleased. If you haven't already, pre-order. It's good. Pre-orders are good because they make bookshops want to stock the book, and then therefore more people will buy the book. So there's a particular voice of someone popular just being caught there at the end. Anyway, the book. Do buy the book. It'd be very nice if you did buy the book. Next week, we're going to do a page turn through the OBR's little report on fiscal rules, because I think it might be quite interesting to do that. It might be another short episode. Maybe it'll be a very long episode. I don't know. Episode 233, the UK's useless fiscal rules. We're going to pick through those, get an understanding of what that's all about. What else are we going to do? So possibly some Amphitrust in 15 minutes, maybe. In the meantime, I'm going to go big face and say thanks for all of that. Hannah Goodlith, speaking of mugs and merch and memories like a sieve, I've messaged you via Discord, merch designing things. Oh, yes, Hannah, you did. Yes, yes, thank you. Do always pester me. Right, enough. Another Abolish the Treasury episode. Yeah, exactly. Right, anyway, everyone, thank you so much for that. A different sort of episode for once, you know. If you enjoyed that, do let me know. I will see you all next week, or possibly in quarter of an hour if I can get an Engineer Plays episode set up in time. Let's see, shall we? I'm debating whether I do that or if I do more map creation to get the map done. I'm not sure. I might end up doing that instead because I'm in charge of Baby and I need to be able to get up at short notice. I'm going to wave vigorously. Everyone. Well, I enjoyed that anyway. Grim as the subject matter was, we've learned something, I think. Cheerio! Cheerio!